Welcome to the Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insight series brought to you by HireWell and CareerWell. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Job Portraits, employer brand superhero, Nate Guggia. It's going to be different every week. I'm going to run out of things pretty quick, but
I know.
So today's segment, broad content or narrow focus. And I realized I almost wanted to retitle this one because I think it's really about depth. And that's part of the solution kind of where we want to go with this. So, and to lay a little bit of groundwork for kind of today's conversation, I see a lot of hot takes about how narrow or broad someone's focus should be in the content they create. And I think, and also I've seen people talk about depth, but I think that a lot of it is incorrect. I also think it's not, doesn't have proper context on what real depth looks like. But even kind of taking a step back, I'm going to talk a little about people and talk about companies, and really it's interchangeable, because I think the one thing that maybe we should do a show on this at some point in time is like the best company content is usually driven by individuals at that company, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have some examples of kind of both people and organizations, and why the kind of approach that I'm going to recommend. I think that the popular theory seems to be that going narrow is better, because if you go narrow, you can go deeper. You can be more tuned in and become like the go-to source for your audience and for your fans and whatnot. And I think that, and I'm going to reiterate, I think that's where you want to start, but I think it's wrong.
Okay. And
I think it's wrong because depth of domain knowledge is really what it comes down to. And I think I wish I would have had a chart, right? So you've got it's quadrants, you know what I mean? So how narrow or deep you go, and how shallow or deep and how broad or narrow you go. And obviously people who are both shallow and narrow never get going. People who are shallow and broad probably never get going. But
right.
I think that what I've noticed a lot of is that people start creating content. I've noticed people that I've followed who I really liked, and then a month later, I've noticed they just keep saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. And other people who I think that are good, I think actually get pretty deep. They have the same approach. They want to, create content that is very kind of on point and on message. But 6 months later, I've kind of tuned them out, because maybe they have 3 or 4 topics they talk about. And I think they're good, but I think that people do themselves a disservice when they don't kind of expand their horizons a little bit. And I think that one of the reasons is because there's a fundamental misunderstanding between basic market segmentation and content. I think that the goal should always be to try to own your market from a market segmentation standpoint, but that doesn't mean that from a content standpoint, you need to keep talking about the same thing over and over again.
Right.
If anything else, I think one of the guiding kind of principles is that people who tune in because they like what you have to say, the reason why they became a fan of yours and why they started following you or following your company was, they found it really interesting or really funny or really amusing. They like how you broke something down, but that's what they expect out of you every single time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And if everything's not perfect, it's fine. But at some point in time, you need to kind of evaluate that if you're just talking about one topic over and over again, how realistic is it that you can keep someone's attention where they're actually going to feel like they've learned something new every time that they hear you talk?
Yeah. Okay. So this is making me think of something that I've said a number of times, that I think if the ultimate goal should be to inspire thought when creating content, right? Inspiring these unique thoughts, opinions, perspectives, whatever they might be. Initially, it is smart to go deep and build a foundation, build a base, build an audience that sees you as like somebody who is like inspiring thought in your specific industry. The fun thing to do is we all have broader interests. We all care about things like outside of this industry that we work in and day out. And to be able to take those other things that we really care about, that inspire us, that we think about, and somehow either just talk about those or somehow relate those to our industry, starts then taking things to a different level. I started experimenting with that a while back because I just honestly, I just got bored talking about the same stuff over and over again. There's only so many things you can talk about. So then it was like, oh, this is how these marketing strategies apply to the work that I'm doing. This is how these product strategies apply to the things that I'm doing. And then it just you get broader and broader and broader. But then the cool thing is that your audience can connect the dots. Mm-hmm. They can take something that you post that has nothing to do with your industry and see it as a new way to apply it to your industry. They can connect those dots. And if you do a good enough job of getting that base, expanding, you can start talking about broader topics, and you just allow the audience to piece it together for you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think that it humanizes you too, right? It makes you more relatable. If all you talk about is, some mundane topic, if you just all you talk about is recruiting, and that's the only thing you ever kind of hit on, it's you become robotic, and I think that you'll have fans for a while, but at some point they just expect you to either be more human or have more topics. I don't know.
I think the thing is we've talked about this agreeableness. So going outside of your lane, let's say, doesn't mean then just going to this other extreme of something that is so general, is such this general agreeable topic that it gets a bunch of engagement anyway, because there's no way anybody's going to disagree with it. Which we see a lot of that too. I think there's finding this approach to broaden the topic, but still keep it deep.
Yeah.
That's where things can get just really, really cool and interesting and make people think a lot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think that it's all about domain knowledge in areas knowledgeable versus expertise, right? And I think that in order to truly engage someone, and I'm going to go through two examples. In order to truly keep people engaged on one topic in perpetuity, you have to be an expert, right? And I don't think I think very, I don't know if anyone I follow on LinkedIn's an expert in anything. I think and I'm throwing myself in there, people are knowledgeable, right? As a solo practitioner, you can at best be knowledgeable at topics, and becoming knowledgeable in something, it's not that hard, but becoming an expert that's next level. So let's back things up and make this a little more tangible. I think Joe Rogan put an end to this debate this year. I'm not a huge Joe Rogan fan. I like him, but the guy got paid $100 million,
and I'm a super fan. On the other hand.
I think he's good, but I mean, he's one of those people that I don't think he's an expert on a single thing he talks about, but he knows a lot about a lot of different fields, which keeps people engaged. He's a prime example of, this is a guy who started out on a TV show, started as a comedian. He knows a lot about Hollywood. He knows a lot about MMA. He has a lot of opinions about topics related to kind of food and health and everything else. He talks about everything under the sun. He's someone who I think falls in the category of, someone who's for the most part knowledgeable about a lot of different topics that people find interesting. And he keeps his fans forever because of that. If he were still just talking about stand-up comedy, you know what I mean? Or just talking about one thing, I think there were certain people who would kind of tune him out. And I hate to bring up the flip side of the coin here, and maybe I'm wrong, because this is also part of the point, is this is someone I no longer really follow, Gary Vee, right? So Gary Vee's he's the content king. He's the one who's been telling everyone to stay narrow and become an expert and all this kind of stuff. But as far as I can tell, Gary Vee stays relevant because his audience turns over and he finds a new audience, which is fine. Right. The guy's super successful. I'm not throwing shade his way, but I don't know anyone who was following Gary Vee 10 years ago who is still really into Gary Vee and following him now.
Yeah.
Whereas Joe Rogan fans, they're for life, right? People who follow him, they followed him 15 years ago and they're still huge Joe Rogan fans. Right. Yep. So it's just my take is that I think that, I think that your fans are going to burn out if you just continue to they want their horizons expanded, and for all the kind of stuff that we said, and that's Joe Rogan is my example of why I think the whole stay narrow thing is completely been put to rest.
I think Rogan is the ultimate example of doing this, because he basically talks about and has guests about on all the things that he's interested in or thinking about or comes across. He's accomplished like the best of both worlds, creating content at scale around a wide variety of very interesting topics. Now this is making me think about companies and how this applies to the company side. We see this a lot. Like we see this done well on the consumer side, on the B2C side. Like if you look at like Dollar Shave Club, for instance, right? Like I'm a member of Dollar Shave Club. I get razors, and now I get a couple other like personal care products because they expanded their offerings. But I think it's like maybe once a week or even once a month. I don't know the cadence, but I get their newsletter. And I don't read very many newsletters, but I read theirs every time because they are talking about the most hilarious, hyper relevant topics that apply to men that we all think about, but that we just don't talk about openly. And they're doing it in individual blog posts in a curated newsletter. And I like seriously like spend the time to go through those articles because they are everyone. I'm just reading them going, I can't believe you're talking about this. But that is like outside of the things that they offer. Yeah. I bring up Dollar Shave Club so much that I'm just a fan. I'm just a fan of everything they do. It's like, I see their newsletter as like a destination. It's a place that I spend time to like hang out in.
And if they just talked about shaving products every single time, you wouldn't care.
Yeah. And I recently saw somebody posted on LinkedIn, a marketer that I follow. He posted about Yeti. I think it was Yeti coolers and whatever, and how they're coming out with this. I believe it's a series about outdoor like personalities, people who are like outdoor extremists and things like this. That has nothing to do with buying coolers or insulated mugs or anything like that. It's just showing people who are doing really cool things outdoors. And it's just, it's all this like this branding element that I think is so smart. But on the B2C side or B2B side, rather, you don't see that very often.
There was one other example I wanted to mention. And this is an example of going deep, because this is where I think this is like, for me, this is the gold standard of going deep. So when someone says you should stay narrow and go deep, this is what comes to mind. This is why I think people can't do it. So I'll fanboy out here. I'm a huge fan of Tasty Trade. Now, most people have never heard of Tasty Trade. Tasty Trade is the people who founded it were the ones who actually created the first. They talk about financial derivatives. They literally created the first retail options trading platform. So before they did this, if anybody who's ever traded a financial option in their life, who's a regular person, has these guys to thank, because had they not set this up, it still wouldn't be something that's accessible for the general public. So 10 years ago, roughly, their next venture, they started a content network, right? So before content got big, like these guys got into it, and everything they do is not about CNBC crap where they're picking stocks and whatnot. It's about actual taking back-tested, data-focused research where they try to understand which strategic methods of optimal scenarios with financial derivatives will make money over time, right? Yeah. This is really complex stuff. They have PhDs, data scientists, like they have a whole think tank of people who do nothing but produce studies on a daily basis. So every day they're producing new content that actually is, they'll show you the parameters of what they're trying to just talk about. And it's everything from portfolio management to utilization to strategy, like lots of different stuff, right? It's they open a futures exchange, they open a brokerage, like that's kind of related to all the stuff that they do. But like, that's what, like, financial derivatives is an extremely deep category. They have a whole team of people working on it. Like, that's what going truly deep on something means. Like, there's no end to what you can do because you're just constantly seeing how the math of these things evolve. Compare, contrast that with, you're just a guy talking about sales. You're just a guy talking about recruiting. Like, these are not endlessly deep topics to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing, if you want, like, there's no way you as one, or you or I as individual people talking about, if we're talking about employer brand or sales recruiting, like, we can't, like, it's impossible for us to ever go that deep. Yeah. If you wanted to go that deep, you would need to have teams of behavioral psychologists And, you would have to have data experts who actually test your theories out. You would have to have all kinds of blind studies done, to really just show what people truly works. Like at best, like you and I and everyone we're following on LinkedIn, like they're knowledgeable, right?
Yeah.
But they're not experts, and it's impossible for them to go truly deep, which is why I also think that like even trying to, you're going to like the only real path for people like us, or for most companies, honestly, unless you have like a think tank backing you up, is to do what Dollar Shave Club did, or just expand what your true domain knowledge base is. Because again, like people who follow you, they're not following you because you have every answer there is about sales or recruiting or some sector of marketing or something else. Like they like how you can break down whatever topics you're knowledgeable about and how you can help resonate with them.
Yeah. Yes. There's this idea of like, and this is a Gary Vee thing for sure. But I think it's a really smart mindset is how can you become a media company, right? And that doesn't mean just like pumping out content about the same stuff over and over again, just with different words. It means like truly, like how can you become this place where people go to hang out, this like destination, whether that's like your LinkedIn profile where people check on a daily or weekly basis to see what you've posted, that counts as hanging out, or if it's a newsletter that is just like a can't miss because it creates so much like value and entertainment, or if it's a website that just provides tons of like relevant information where people just know, like, if I want to learn about this and like other cool stuff, this is where I go. Like when you can create that, then that's when you start separating yourself from the rest. And I also like, I've thought about this so much as it applies to the stuff that I put out. I'm doing some other like new creative experimental things with my content. And I'd like, it's just because like I have a lot of other interests that are outside of employer branding that, and I think it's okay for any of us to admit that we just get bored talking about the same stuff over and over again. Doesn't mean I don't care. But it just means like I get bored. Like how many times can you hear me talk about employer branding? It's like enough already.
In case you haven't noticed, like my profession is in recruiting, and that's like the last thing I talk about.
By the way, like I got to give you major kudos because your Saturday posts are so entertaining and are just a break from the week, not your weekly, just the weekly LinkedIn experience that it's like, I don't know, man, you've just shown that you can bring this like whole other element and just have fun on the platform too.
I mean, I've been trolling on the internet for 20, 25 years now. So this is the PG version of stuff I've gotten into before. So
yeah, but it's like it's just like a fun opportunity to call out some things that we all think about. But I mean, I want to go back to this thing. It's like giving permission. If anybody needs permission, I need permission. So that's why I say it. Give me permission to like start talking about things that are outside of your lane and at times that can feel scary. Like the repercussions aren't very big, but like, even for me, like I'll never forget, I did this post where I was talking about like product market fit as it applies to employer branding. Like the first time I did that, I was like, whoa, like as far as like the stuff I talk about, like this is going a little bit out of my lane and starting to get into another industry and stuff, but it really resonated. But that was like my first step in taking, we'll call it a risk, just like a personal risk. And I think that we all like, I just want to give people permission to like get out of your lane and to take risks and to like talk about some things that you care about in interesting ways. And don't worry about having to be this person in your industry. You could be this person in your industry and
that's, and I agree 100%. And like a little bit of a preview on that. Like I had a conversation with our buddy, Adam Rosenfield, a few weeks ago. We were talking about, we were kind of, because this is what we do on this, as you and I, we're just kind of mocking how like some people just talk about the same stuff over and over again. And like, why don't people talk about like more important stuff, like DEI, And that kind of translated into, because, a lot of the influencers never had to deal with that kind of stuff and they don't know anything about it. And, I maintain the DEI, the issue that companies run into it in the execution of it is that it gets stuck in the DEI HR community, right? So like the owners don't take, a lot of owners and then leaders of companies don't take a vested interest in it. They just say, we're going to push this off to this group. It never gets and that's no disrespect to that group, but it doesn't get the attention it needs to truly drive forward. At which point Adam turned it around and says, why don't you talk about DEI more then? I'm like, you got me. So yeah, I think next week I'm going to do nothing but I'm getting out of my comfort zone and doing nothing but talking about DEI, except for the thing except for the thing you and I are doing on Friday. That was, which is another thing we could preview, but either next week or the week after. But yeah, I think it's important because here's what it did in the meantime. Like I had to sit down and actually think about like what my takes are on the topics. And I had to talk to some more people. Like I've done podcasts related to ageism and diversity, inclusion, hiring and stuff like that before, but I had to review a lot of notes. And it's like I said before, you can become knowledgeable by taking an interest in something and talking to people in that field and reading up on it. You know what I mean? And knowledgeable enough to be comfortable enough to have an opinion. You know what I mean? Like I'll never be an expert, but I think it's also an important growth process, I think, for people too, in terms of expanding your horizons. Yeah. To force yourself to get out of your kind of comfort zone, but take all the steps necessary to get there to be knowledgeable on the topic.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a bunch of ideas for companies, how they can get out of their zone. There's a lot of opportunities to like, I was thinking about like a restaurant delivery company or like a direct to consumer food company who like sends you like meal plans or whatever. It's like, don't talk about recipes and stuff like that. Like do an interview series with local restaurant tours who are doing creative things to like keep their business alive during this. Like stuff like that, man. It's like, it doesn't, there's an art in talking about things outside of your lane that tie back to the thing that you do that make people just like still continually think of your brand.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And then I guess it's tricky. That's why it's not easy. I mean, if everyone would do it, but I think that's how people have to think about this kind of stuff. So I wanted to, there was one other whole like side of this I wanted to cover. I want to make sure, we don't run out of time or anything, but before we get too further off track, the company side of all this, like in terms of like hiring, right? Like we haven't really talked about this. And I think that, and if my point about Rogan doesn't make the point about why you should go broader, why there's value in it, I think just as looking at 2020 as a year makes this point for me, the pandemic and George Floyd, like I think that companies can no longer talk about just themselves and their brand anymore and stay in their bubble. I think that every company is expected to have address diversity, equity, inclusion in their messaging, what they stand for, what their policies are. And people expect that. People expect when candidates are interviewing with companies, you know what I mean? And just as much the pandemic, like I 100% right now, if I'm seeing people leaving companies because they don't like how the company's addressing the pandemic. And when they're interviewing with companies, that's one of the first things they ask. And if the company's like, I don't know, we haven't thought about it, or we'll all be back in the office next month, or, you know what I mean? If there's not like a logically forward thinking thought put into and message kind of communicated about what their return to work policy is, it's absolutely costing people candidates. And, I think that with this whole year has made us more socially aware of a lot of things, and it's things that companies have to address, at a minimum within their branding to candidates. But I would even argue that it has to be beyond that, like it can't just be something that you're hearing about when you go to interview. Like in order for it to be like credible, you know what I mean? Like it needs to be a little more public than that and a little more proactive. But you're the expert in this field, so you tell me.
This is like really making me think about the power of allowing your people to have a voice. and allowing them to have freedom when it comes to that voice, because that is an amplification of the things that you care about as a company. So if you give your employees a voice and say, I trust you to talk about the things that you care about that aren't related to the piece of software that we sell, that's powerful. That gives people on the outside a perspective of what it's like inside the company, because all of those people make up your company. And it's showing that those are the things that like you as a collective organization care about, and that you want to like call out some of the problems and the issues and the things that you want to see on a larger scale shift. And it implies that you're at least doing some things internally to make those things happen for your people. Like you don't even have to directly say we are doing these things with that example. Just the voice alone implies.
Well, it's inherent. Like, you know what I mean? If you can show the world you give your employees a voice by letting them talk, it's as simple as that, you know?
Yeah. And that's like, those guardrails just like need to come down, because it's just fear. And it's fear that is just being this bottleneck to a lot of influence that I think that is just really needed right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm running out of talking points. You got anything else you want to cover this time, or?
No, I think I hit them.
All right.
I'm looking through them. I think we're good.
All right. We can go offline and plan when our next chat's going to be, probably 2 weeks as always.
Yeah.
So, but to wrap this up. So that's a wrap for the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the Hire Well channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, and Spotify. Nate, pleasure as always.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Everyone else, we'll see you next time.